The laughter started before the vows were even finished. It rippled through the back pews of the small church in Millbrook, Connecticut, carried on whispers that made no effort to stay quiet. A plumber marrying the library girl. Some called it sweet. Most called it sad. Nathan Cole stood at the altar in a borrowed suit, his calloused hands wrapped around the trembling fingers of Evelyn Mercer, a woman who owned almost nothing anyone could see. His 7-year-old daughter Lily clutched a bouquet of wildflowers beside them, her eyes darting toward the snickering guests, and in the pocket of Evie's simple white dress, her phone buzzed relentlessly. 47 missed calls, all from a New York area code. All from people who had been searching for her for 6 years. 8 months earlier, Nathan had no intention of falling in love again. His wife, Sarah, had been gone for 4 years, killed by a drunk driver on a rain-slicked highway outside Hartford. He had buried her on a Tuesday and returned to work on a Wednesday because Lily needed to eat and grief did not pay the bills. He fixed pipes and unclogged drains and came home smelling like rust and bleach, and somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing that his life could contain anything more than survival. The neighbors whispered about him behind closed doors. They called him stubborn for refusing to move on, for keeping Sarah's photos on every wall, for turning down the casseroles and the sympathy and the not-so-subtle suggestions from well-meaning widows at the church. Nathan heard them talking. He just did not care. His heart had room for only 2 people, and one of them was buried in the cemetery on Maple Hill. It was Lily who changed everything. She needed a book for a school project, something about gardens, and the public library was the only place in Millbrook that still felt like it belonged to everyone. Nathan walked her through the door on a Saturday afternoon in March, and that was when he first saw Evelyn Mercer. She was sitting alone in a corner of the children's section, reading aloud to no one. Her voice was soft but deliberate, each word given weight and breath, and the book in her hands was The Secret Garden. Lily wandered away from Nathan's side, drawn by the sound, and settled onto the floor beside this stranger, as if she had known her all her life. Nathan found them 10 minutes later. He was ready to apologize for his daughter's intrusion, to gather her up and leave before they caused any trouble. But Evie looked up at him with eyes that held something he had not seen in years, not pity, not judgment, just a quiet recognition of loneliness meeting loneliness. "She was not bothering me," Evie said. "She was keeping me company." The words hit Nathan harder than he expected. He understood, in that moment, that this woman knew what it meant to be alone in a room full of people. She knew what it felt like to read aloud to empty air because the silence was too heavy to bear. From that day forward, Lily demanded weekly trips to the library. Nathan told himself he was only indulging his daughter, but the truth was harder to admit. He found himself watching Evie when she was not looking, noticing the way she moved through the stacks, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. She lived in a rented cottage at the edge of town. She worked part-time shelving books and helping children with their reading. She had no family that anyone knew of, no history that she shared, no past that extended beyond her arrival in Millbrook 6 years earlier. The town had theories, of course. They always did. Some said she was running from a bad marriage. Others guessed she was hiding from debts or scandal or shame. A few of the older women at the Methodist church whispered that she might be simple, not quite right in the head, because what kind of person chose to live so small when the world offered so much more? Nathan did not care about their theories. He cared that Evie remembered Lily's favorite color and her birthday and the name of the stuffed rabbit she still slept with at age 7. He cared that she looked at him like he was someone worth looking at, even when he showed up at the library with grease under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. Millbrook was the kind of town that remembered everything and forgave nothing. Population 4,000 and shrinking, nestled in the hills of Connecticut where the wealth of the coast never quite reached. The main street had 3 empty storefronts and 1 working stoplight. The biggest employer was Davenport Construction, owned by a man named Richard Davenport, who had inherited the company from his father and the arrogance from somewhere deeper. Richard Davenport had known Nathan since high school. They had played football on the same team, though Richard had been the quarterback and Nathan had been the lineman nobody remembered. 20 years later, the hierarchy remained unchanged. Richard wore suits that cost more than Nathan's truck. He sat on the town council and the church board and every committee that decided anything worth deciding. And he never missed an opportunity to remind Nathan Cole of his place. It happened on a Tuesday morning at the diner on Main Street. Nathan was eating breakfast alone, trying to stretch a cup of coffee into an hour of peace before his first job of the day. Richard walked in with two of his foremen, loud and laughing, and spotted Nathan in the corner booth. "Still crawling under sinks, Cole?" Richard's voice carried across the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some men never rise. They just stay down there in the dark where they belong." His foreman laughed on cue. The waitress looked away, embarrassed. Two old-timers at the counter shook their heads but said nothing. Nathan said nothing. He had learned years ago that responding only made it worse. He finished his coffee, left money on the table, and walked out into the gray morning light. The door swung shut behind him, but not before he heard Richard's final comment. "That is what happens when you marry beneath yourself. You end up with nothing." He did not see Evie sitting 2 booths away, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes following him out the door. She had heard every word. That afternoon, she appeared at his house. Lily answered the door and squealed with delight, pulling Evie inside before Nathan could even set down his wrench. She was carrying a cardboard box filled with books. "I thought Lily might like these," Evie said. "They helped me through some dark years." Nathan looked at the titles. Charlotte's Web, Island of the Blue Dolphins, Bridge to Terabithia, A Wrinkle in Time, books about loss and loneliness and finding your way through, books about children who felt different, who did not belong, who discovered that their strangeness was actually their strength. He looked at Evie and saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the careful composure she always maintained. "They were my mother's," she said quietly. "She gave them to me when I was Lily's age, before she got sick. She told me that books were the only friends who never judged you, never left you, never made you feel like you were not enough." It was the first personal thing she had ever told him. Nathan understood instinctively that it was also a gift, an offering of trust that cost her something to give. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the box, the way she watched his face for any sign of rejection. He invited her to stay for dinner. She said yes. The power went out across Millbrook on a Thursday night in June. A summer storm had rolled through the valley, knocking down trees and power lines, plunging the town into darkness that lasted until dawn. Nathan drove through the rain to check on Evie, telling himself it was just neighborly concern, knowing it was something more. He found her sitting on her porch with a single candle, watching the lightning split the sky. She did not seem surprised to see him. She moved over on the porch swing without a word, making room, and they sat together listening to the thunder roll across the hills. "I came here to disappear," she said after a long silence. "I was surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Everyone always wanted something. My time, my attention, my approval, my signature on documents I did not understand. Here, no one wants anything. It is peaceful." Nathan thought about that word. Peaceful. It was not how most people described loneliness, but he understood what she meant. There was a certain freedom in being overlooked, in moving through the world without anyone expecting you to be more than you were. He had felt it himself after Sarah died, the strange relief of being left alone with his grief. He told her about Sarah. About the night he got the phone call and drove to the hospital and sat in a plastic chair for 3 hours before a doctor he had never met told him that his wife was gone. About coming home to Lily and not knowing what to say, so he said nothing, and they had cried together in the dark until the sun came up. About the weeks and months that followed, when he went through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. "Lily believes in you," Evie said when he finished. "She talks about you constantly at the library. My daddy can fix anything. My daddy is the strongest person in the world. My daddy never gives up. Nathan felt his throat tighten. He had not known. He had been so consumed with his own grief that he had not realized how closely his daughter was watching him, how much she depended on his strength even when he felt like he had none left. Evie reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool from the night air. "And I think I am starting to believe in you too," she said softly. The words hung in the air between them. Nathan wanted to reach for her properly, to pull her close and tell her that she was the first person who had made him feel alive since Sarah died. But fear held him back. He had already lost one woman he loved. He was not sure he could survive losing another. The candle flickered and went out. In the darkness, he heard Evie's phone buzz softly in her pocket. She silenced it without looking, but he caught a glimpse of the screen. 47 missed calls. The same number, over and over. A notification that read, "Urgent. Board demands response." He did not ask. She did not explain. And the storm raged on around them while something quieter and more dangerous grew in the space between. Autumn came to Millbrook in shades of gold and crimson, the maple trees along Main Street putting on their annual display for an audience that mostly forgot to look up. Nathan had been finding excuses to see Evie almost every day. A broken faucet in her cottage, a stuck window, a shelf that needed mounting. Jobs that took 5 minutes but somehow stretched into hours of conversation and laughter, and the slow, careful building of something neither of them dared to name. She paid him in dinners and conversation and the kind of attention that made him feel like he mattered. She asked about his work, his childhood, his dreams. She remembered details he had mentioned weeks earlier and brought them up again as if they were important. No one had done that for him since Sarah. Lily had started calling her Miss Evie, then just Evie, and finally something that sounded almost like Mom when she thought no one was listening. It broke Nathan's heart and healed it at the same time. His daughter needed a mother. He had been denying it for years, telling himself that he was enough, that they did not need anyone else. But watching Lily bloom under Evie's attention, he could not pretend anymore. He proposed on the old wooden bridge at the edge of town, the same bridge where he had proposed to Sarah 12 years earlier. He had not planned to do it there. He had not planned to do it at all, but they were walking together in the fading light. Lily running ahead to throw leaves into the creek below, and the words came out before he could stop them. "I am not offering you much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A small house that needs more repairs than I have time for. A messy life that does not always make sense. A daughter who already loves you more than she should probably love someone she has only known for a few months. But I am offering you everything I have, my whole heart, whatever is left of it." Evie's eyes filled with tears. She said yes before he even finished speaking, reaching for him with both hands, pulling him close. Then she pulled back, her face troubled by something he could not read. "There are things about me you do not know," she said. "Things I should tell you, things that might change how you feel about all of this." Nathan shook his head. He did not want conditions. He did not want complications. He just wanted her. "I know who you are," he said firmly. "You are the woman who taught my daughter to love books again. You are the woman who makes me laugh when I forget how. You are the woman I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. That is enough. That is everything." He kissed her before she could argue, and in her pocket, her phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a name he could not see. Thomas Hartley, attorney at law. Final warning. The engagement announcement spread through Millbrook like a virus. By the following Sunday, everyone in town had an opinion, and most of those opinions were not kind. Nathan heard the whispers at the hardware store and the gas station and the checkout line at the grocery. The plumber and the library girl, two nobodies finding each other. A match made in nowhere special. Richard Davenport threw a party at his house the week before the wedding. He called it a celebration of community, but everyone knew it was really a celebration of Richard Davenport. He had just closed a major deal with some investors from New York, and he wanted the whole town to see how important he had become. Half of Millbrook showed up to drink his expensive wine and eat his catered canapés and pretend they did not notice the way he looked down on all of them. Nathan was not invited. Neither was Evie, but the gossip from the party reached them anyway, carried by Margaret Cole, Nathan's mother, who had attended out of some misguided sense of social obligation. "Richard made a toast," Margaret reported, her voice tight with disapproval. She was sitting at Nathan's kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. He said he wished the happy couple well. Then he laughed and said at least they would not disappoint anyone because neither of them had ever amounted to anything in the first place. The whole room laughed with him. It made me sick. Nathan's jaw clenched. He had spent his whole life being underestimated by men like Richard Davenport. He had made peace with it, mostly, telling himself that their opinions did not matter, that his value was not determined by their approval. But hearing those words directed at Evie, at this woman who had given him hope again, stirred something hot and angry in his chest. Evie placed her hand on his arm. "Let them laugh," she said softly. There was something in her voice, a calm certainty that surprised him. They do not know what they do not know, and someday soon, they will learn. That night, after Nathan and Lily had gone to sleep, Evie sat alone in the kitchen and made a phone call. Thomas Hartley answered on the first ring, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Evelyn, the board is threatening legal action. They say you have abandoned your fiduciary duties. They are preparing to file an injunction that will strip you of your voting rights. You need to come back to New York. You need to face this." Evie stared out the window at the dark Connecticut hills, at the quiet town that had given her 6 years of peace. "Let them try," she said. "I am done running. But I will face them on my terms, not theirs." And then she hung up. The wedding was small by design and smaller by circumstance. Pastor David performed the ceremony in the chapel where Nathan's parents had been married 50 years earlier. The stained glass windows cast colored light across the wooden pews, and the autumn air carried the smell of falling leaves through the open doors. Margaret sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. She had not fully accepted Evie, not yet, but she had stopped arguing about the wedding. That was progress, Nathan supposed. A handful of neighbors filled the other pews, some supportive, some merely curious, all of them watching to see what would happen next. Lily stood beside her father in a dress she had picked out herself, lavender with white flowers, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers that Evie had gathered that morning from the fields behind her cottage. When the moment came for the rings, her small hands trembled as she held them out, and Nathan felt his heart crack open all over again. His daughter deserved this. A complete family, a mother who would love her, a future that held more than just survival. Pastor David asked if anyone objected. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. 4, 5. Then someone in the back coughed, and a ripple of nervous laughter passed through the congregation. Nathan heard someone whisper about plumbers and library girls, but he did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Evie. The vows were simple. Nathan promised to love Evie in sickness and health, in poverty and plenty, for as long as they both lived. Evie promised the same, her voice steady, even as tears streamed down her face. And when Pastor David pronounced them husband and wife, Lily let out a cheer that echoed off the stone walls of the chapel. The reception was cake and punch in the church basement. Nathan danced with his daughter while Evie danced with his mother, and for 1 perfect hour, the world outside ceased to exist. The whispers and the laughter and the judgment all faded away, replaced by something warmer and truer. Then the black sedan pulled up outside. Nathan saw it through the basement window, sleek and expensive, utterly out of place on the gravel parking lot of a small-town church. A man in a gray suit stepped out, his face familiar in a way Nathan could not quite place. The man straightened his tie, checked his phone, and walked toward the church entrance with the purposeful stride of someone who was used to being obeyed. Evie saw him at the same moment. Her face went pale. She set down her punch cup and moved toward the door, but she was not fast enough. The man had already entered, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice carried across the basement, cutting through the music and the chatter like a knife. "It is over. They have found you. The board is filing an injunction. You have 72 hours to appear in New York, or they will freeze the entire foundation." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward Evie, then toward the stranger, then back to Evie again. Margaret's teacup clattered against its saucer. Pastor David set down his slice of cake. Even Lily stopped dancing, her small face creased with confusion. Nathan stepped forward, his body moving on instinct to put himself between his wife and whatever threat this man represented. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And who is she?" The man in the gray suit looked at Nathan with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "My name is Thomas Hartley," he said. "I am Miss Mercer's attorney, and your wife is the sole heir to the Mercer Foundation, one of the largest charitable trusts in the country. She has been hiding here for 6 years, and now her past has finally caught up with her." They drove home in silence, Lily asleep in the back seat, the questions hanging between them like a physical weight. Nathan did not speak until they were inside the house. The door closed against the night, the world reduced to the three of them and the truth that could no longer be avoided. Evie sat at the kitchen table, her wedding dress wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. She had stopped trying to hold herself together. She looked, Nathan thought, like someone who had been carrying a weight for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me everything." So she did. Her full name was Evelyn Grace Mercer. Her mother, Catherine Mercer, had founded the Mercer Foundation 40 years earlier with money inherited from her own family, old New England wealth that traced back to shipping and textiles and all the industries that had built America. Catherine had believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. She had spent her life giving it away, funding hospitals and schools and community programs in towns that the rest of the world had forgotten. Evie had grown up in that world of board meetings and charity galas and expectations that pressed down on her like a physical weight. She had been groomed from childhood to take over the foundation, to carry on her mother's legacy, to be the face of Mercer philanthropy for the next generation. Then her mother got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. She was gone within 6 months, and Evie was left alone with a foundation worth $2.3 billion and a board of directors who saw her grief as an opportunity. "They wanted to change everything," Evie said, her voice hollow with old pain. "They wanted to invest in real estate and tech startups and all the things that make money instead of giving it away. They called it modernization. They called it sustainability. They called it fiduciary responsibility. But I knew what it really was. They wanted to turn my mother's life work into their personal piggy bank. She had fought them for 2 years. She had hired lawyers and filed motions and attended board meetings where men twice her age told her she was too young and too emotional and too naive to understand how the world really worked. She had won some battles and lost others, and slowly, piece by piece, the foundation had begun to drift away from its original purpose. The breaking point came at a gala in Manhattan. Evie had overheard 2 board members joking about a grant her mother had established to provide scholarships for children in rural communities. They were planning to redirect the funds to a development project in the Hamptons, a luxury resort that would generate returns for the foundation's investment portfolio. When Evie confronted them, they had laughed at her. They had called her a sentimental fool. They had reminded her that she was only one vote and that the board could overrule her whenever they chose. That night, she had packed a single suitcase and driven north. She had found Millbrook by accident, a town small enough to disappear in, quiet enough to heal. She had rented the cottage and taken the job at the library and built a life that belonged entirely to her. She had maintained just enough contact with Thomas Hartley to exercise her voting rights when critical decisions came before the board, but she had refused to return to New York refused to play the game on their terms, refused to become the person they wanted her to be. "I thought I could hide forever," she said. "I thought if I stayed small enough and quiet enough, they would forget about me. I thought I could protect what mattered from a distance, but they had not forgotten. They had spent 6 years trying to find her, and now they had succeeded. The injunction Thomas had mentioned was real. If Evie did not appear before the board within 72 hours, they would use her absence as grounds to strip her of her voting rights entirely. They would take full control of the foundation and do whatever they wanted with her mother's legacy. Nathan listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not ask the questions that were burning in his throat. "Why did you not tell me? How could you keep this secret? Did you think I would not understand?" He just sat across from his wife and let her speak until she had emptied herself of secrets. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, an owl called into the darkness. Lily shifted in her sleep upstairs, her small body making the floorboards creak. "Why did you not tell me?" Nathan finally asked, and his voice was gentler than he expected. Evie looked at him with eyes that held 6 years of loneliness. "Because for once, I wanted someone to love me for who I am, not what I have. I wanted to be just Evie, the woman from the library who reads to children and drinks too much tea and does not know how to fix anything. I wanted to know that if you chose me, it was because you saw me, not my money or my name or my foundation." Nathan stood up. He walked around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. They were trembling, he realized. She was terrified, not of the board or the lawyers or the money, but of him, of what he would say, of what he would do. He said the only thing that mattered. "You have been carrying this alone for 6 years. You do not have to anymore." The next morning, Nathan made phone calls. He canceled his jobs for the week. He asked Margaret to stay with Lily. He booked 2 tickets on a train to New York. Evie tried to argue. "This is my fight," she said. "You do not have to be involved. You do not have to risk what little you have for my problems." Nathan looked at her with the same stubborn calm that had gotten him through every hard thing in his life. "I married you," he said. "That means your fights are my fights. That is how this works. That is how it has always worked." They were not going alone. Margaret insisted on coming, her disapproval of Evie apparently overridden by her disapproval of anyone who would threaten her family. Pastor David came too, saying he wanted to offer moral support, though Nathan suspected he was also curious. And Lily refused to be left behind, clinging to Evie's hand with a fierce possessiveness that made words unnecessary. On the train, Evie told Nathan the rest of what she knew. Richard Davenport, the man who had mocked Nathan for 20 years, was not just a local businessman with delusions of grandeur. He was one of the investors who had been pressuring the Mercer Foundation to change its direction. His company had submitted a proposal to develop a piece of land in Millbrook, the community park where children played and families gathered, into a commercial shopping center. The foundation was considering funding the project as part of their new investment strategy. Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach. All those years of condescension, all those remarks about plumbers who never rose, and Richard Davenport had been begging for money from a foundation controlled by the woman Nathan had just married. The irony was almost too perfect to bear. Evie squeezed his hand. "He does not know who I am," she said. "Nobody does. But they are about to find out." The board meeting was held in a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of building that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Security guards in matching blazers escorted them to an elevator that whisked them 40 floors above the city. The doors opened onto a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a table long enough to land a small plane. 12 people sat around that table, 11 men and 1 woman, all of them in suits that cost more than Nathan earned in a month. They looked up when Evie entered, and Nathan watched their expressions cycle through surprise, recognition, and something that looked almost like fear. "Miss Mercer," said the man at the head of the table. His name was Harold Cross, and he had been the Foundation's chairman for the past 4 years. Evie walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. She did not sit. She stood with her hands resting on the leather back, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and calm and utterly unfamiliar to Nathan. This was not the quiet woman from the library. This was someone else entirely. "I have reviewed the documents you sent to my attorney," she said. "The proposed injunction is based on the claim that I have abandoned my fiduciary responsibilities. But as the minutes from every board meeting for the past 6 years will show, I have exercised my voting rights on every significant decision. I have simply chosen to do so remotely." Harold Cross shifted in his seat. "The board has concerns about your absence. We feel that effective governance requires physical presence." Evie smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "Physical presence," she repeated, "like the presence that allowed you to approve the Westbrook Resort development last March? The one that diverted $14 million from rural education programs to build a luxury spa in the Hamptons?" The room went very still. Nathan saw several board members exchange nervous glances. "Or perhaps you mean the presence that allowed you to reclassify the Hartford Housing Initiative as a loss leader and sell the properties to a development company owned by your brother-in-law, Mr. Cross?" Harold Cross's face had gone the color of old paper. "These are complex financial decisions that require—" "These are violations of my mother's founding charter," Evie interrupted, "and I have documentation for every single one of them." She opened the folder she had been carrying and spread papers across the table. Nathan could not read them from where he stood, but he could see the effect they had on the board members. Several of them leaned back in their chairs as if the documents might bite them. For the next hour, Evie systematically dismantled 6 years of mismanagement. She had receipts, she had emails, she had internal memos that were never supposed to leave the building. She had evidence of conflicts of interest and self-dealing and the kind of creative accounting that would make a forensic auditor weep with joy. When she finished, she looked around the table at the men and women who had thought they could steal her mother's legacy while she hid in a small town in Connecticut. "I am not asking for your resignation," she said. "I am informing you of it. Effective immediately, I am assuming direct control of the Mercer Foundation. My attorney will provide each of you with the terms of your separation by end of business today." One of the board members, a man Nathan recognized from his internet search the night before as Richard Davenport's primary investor contact, stood up from his chair. His face was red with anger. "You cannot do this," he said. "We have contracts. We have agreements. We have lawyers who will. You have 60 days to vacate your positions," Evie said calmly, "or I will turn these documents over to the Attorney General's office and let them decide what you have." The man sat down. Evie turned to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "One more thing," she said. "The Millbrook development project proposed by Davenport Construction is hereby rejected. That land will remain a community park, and the foundation will provide a grant for its renovation and maintenance in perpetuity." She paused, and Nathan saw the ghost of a smile cross her face. "The park will be renamed in honor of my husband's late wife. It will be called the Sarah Cole Memorial Park. And Mr. Davenport can explain to his investors why the woman he has been mocking for 20 years just ended his biggest development deal." 6 months later, the Sarah Cole Memorial Park reopened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that half of Millbrook attended. The new playground equipment had been installed the week before. The walking paths had been repaved. A small garden had been planted near the entrance, tended by volunteers from the library reading program that Evie still helped to run. Nathan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his wife cut the ceremonial ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, the same kind of clothes she had worn when she was just the library girl that no one paid attention to. But now everyone was paying attention. Now they knew who she was and what she had done, and the whispers that followed her through town had taken on a very different tone. Richard Davenport was not at the ceremony. His company had filed for bankruptcy 2 months earlier, unable to recover from the loss of the Millbrook project and the withdrawal of investment from several partners who had suddenly developed concerns about his business practices. He had sold his house and moved to Florida, and no one in Millbrook missed him. Margaret Cole stood beside her son, her arm linked through his. She had apologized to Evie 3 times since the trip to New York, and each time Evie had told her there was nothing to apologize for. "We all judge people before we know them," she had said. "The important thing is being willing to change when we learn the truth." After the ceremony, Nathan found Evie standing alone by the new garden, looking at the plaque that bore Sarah's name. He had worried at first that it would be strange, naming a park after his late wife while he stood beside his new one, but Evie had insisted. She had said that loving Sarah was part of what made Nathan the man he was, and she would never ask him to pretend otherwise. "They laughed at you," she said softly. "All those years." Nathan nodded. He remembered the whispers and the jokes and the way people looked at him when they thought he was not paying attention. The plumber who never rose. The widower who never moved on. The nobody who married another nobody and proved them all right. Except he had not proved them right. He had proved them wrong in ways they were only beginning to understand. Evie took his hand. "I used to think that holding everything meant carrying it alone. My mother's legacy. The foundation. The weight of all that money and responsibility. I thought if I shared it with anyone, they would try to take it from me, like the board did. Like everyone in that world always tried to do." She turned to face him, and Nathan saw the same woman he had met in the library, the one who read aloud to herself in the children's section because she was lonely and did not know how to ask for company. "But you taught me something," she said. "You and Lily. You taught me that holding everything does not mean carrying it alone. It means finding people you trust enough to share it with. It means putting it down sometimes, so you can pick up something more important." Nathan pulled her close. "And what is more important?" "This," she said simply. "Us. Family." Lily came running up then, her face flushed with excitement from playing on the new swings. She wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a tangle of limbs and laughter that made several nearby parents smile. "Mom," she said, and the word came out naturally now, without hesitation or self-consciousness. "Can we get ice cream?" Evie looked at Nathan, he looked at Lily, and all 3 of them burst out laughing at the beautiful ordinariness of the request. "Yes," Evie said. "We can definitely get ice cream." They walked together toward the parking lot, past the families enjoying the park and the children climbing on the new equipment and the garden that would bloom every spring with flowers, for a woman that Nathan had loved and lost and never forgotten. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang the hour. No one laughed at them anymore. No one whispered behind their backs or made jokes about plumbers and library girls and matches made in nowhere. They had learned, all of them, that the quiet woman who had appeared in their town 6 years ago was not running away from anything. She was running toward something, toward a life that was hers, toward a family that saw her for who she really was, toward a man who had taught her that love did not require her to be anything other than herself. Nathan Cole had spent 38 years being underestimated. He had fixed other people's pipes and cleaned other people's drains and listened to other people tell him that he would never amount to anything. And then he had married a woman who controlled one of the largest charitable foundations in the country, and he had not changed at all. He still wore the same work boots. He still drove the same truck. He still came home smelling like rust and bleach, and his wife still kissed him anyway. That was the secret, he realized. That was what the Richards of the world would never understand. Rising did not mean climbing over other people. Rising meant finding the ones who saw you clearly, who loved you completely, who held your hand while you both figured out what really mattered. Evie had held everything, the money and the power and the legacy of a mother who had tried to make the world better, but she had also held something more precious than any of that. She had held hope. She had held patience. She had held the belief that somewhere out there was a man who would love her for herself, and a child who would call her mom, and a life that was worth more than any number on a balance sheet. She had held everything. And then she had found the place where she could finally put it down.